Is Patricia your mom? What happened to her?
Vargas here. I'm sick and won't be coming in today, alright? It's drudgery, this life of detention, suspension, expulsion, the staff meetings, the paper.
Detachment is a bizarre film that I stumbled upon not too long ago from one of those brain-numbing TikTok accounts that posts entire movies in fragmented 2-minute clips. This is one of those movies that, despite having a very star-studded cast, slips under the radar, but I'm glad it was shown to me because its subject matter is one that I consider extremely important. It is, at its core, a very harsh critique on the American school system, which is increasingly dominated by neoliberal ideology. The modern American school treats its students as commodities on a production line. A letter grade at the top of a standardized test is a faulty indicator of a person's intelligence, and yet it determines these students' worth and how far they will go in their life. Whilst schools themselves compete for funding with other schools as if they're businesses and not vital public services. On top of this, teachers receive abysmal compensation for a job that requires them to essentially become the parents of countless students. While these issues are somewhat less terrible in countries like Canada, the UK, and Australia, they are by no means non-existent here. The problems that this film tackles are not often talked about through the medium of film, and when they are, they're very rarely conveyed as creatively as this film handles them. It does not have outstanding reviews from critics, and I do think some of it is a bit messy in places, but it presents its subject matter in a really compelling way, and for that I want to spend some time discussing it. The opening quote taken from Camus tells us some of the mindset of the protagonist. Henry Barth, while being an extraordinary teacher and seemingly a regular person, has an extremely traumatic past. He discovered his mother's dead body as a child after she committed suicide via overdose, and it's also kind of suggested that his grandfather, who Henry must look after, was sexually assaulting her. Henry is generally benefited by his emotionally detached nature when it comes to his teaching, as he's able to understand the emotions of aggressive and immature students, whilst being able to avoid being hurt or affected in any way by them. Henry treats their anger as what it is, misplaced frustration with the society and present education system that strangles them and forces them to conform. An early scene shows us how he approaches a class which has lost faith in learning. By inviting the stereotypical homophobic bully to leave the room in such a calm way, he removes someone who is making other students uncomfortable whilst seeming to maintain his personal freedom.
Hey, Marcus. Guess what?
What?
You're free to leave.
Like right now?
Like right now.
Alright, yo, I'll catch you later, man. What the fuck? Do you want me to go to the dean's office?
I don't care where you go.
And as another is threatening to inflict harm on him, he says this.
That bag, it doesn't have any feelings. It's empty. I don't have any feelings you can hurt either. Okay? I understand you're angry. I used to be very angry too, okay? I get it. You have no reason to be angry with me because I'm one of the few people that's here trying to give you an opportunity. Now, I'm gonna ask you to just sit down and do your best, and I'll give you a piece of paper. How's that?
It may at first seem like the teacher here is weak, or as if he shouldn't allow his students to be so openly hostile towards him, But consider for a moment the alternative. If the teacher in this moment loses his calm and launches into an angry tirade against this student, he would only serve to validate his anger. The student doesn't have a personal hatred towards Mr. Barth. He just wants something or someone to direct his frustration towards. And the student here views the teacher as someone who is predisposed to be his opponent. It is easy to understand why a student wouldn't have any respect for their teacher. They're forced into these restrictive spaces and forced to consume whatever the teacher spits out of their mouth. When you set such constricting parameters for students to exist within, all they want to do is break them down. Henry knows this, and so he sees through to the student's humanity and lets him know that he's there to help. This is a big no-no for those who subscribe to traditional education and its emphasis on student obedience and teacher control. But we see what that gets us in modern education, because teachers can't maintain control of 25 restless, bored, and frustrated students. The answer is not then an attempt at more intimidation or more control, because to take this approach is not even effective when it's successful. Students who participate out of fear are not learning to their fullest extent. They're doing the bare minimum to not get steamrolled. And there will always be students who you can't intimidate. You would have to employ armed security guards with orders to mace disruptive students to get what you think you want. And there's not really learning taking place at that point. That's more like forced labor. There's one scene in here with this teacher who has just quit. And he's speaking on an answering machine, talking about discipline and reasserting control. And his speech kind of morphs into this history class where they're listening to a Joseph Goebbels speech.
Fucking kids who have no desires, no fire, no minds to feed.
Die Führer in der Erkämpfung sind Unsinn und der schwersten persönlichen Belastungen.
And I think that pretty much says it all. Control does not facilitate learning. Think back to a time you had an awful and cruel teacher who you were scared of, and then think of a time you had a relaxed, passionate, and human teacher. Who did you learn more from? So that's this movie's first point, I think. Students' needs are not met through these restrictive systems. They need to be allowed the freedom to find themselves and what they're interested in. They don't care for and won't respond to the increased economization of the classroom. They don't care about what type of students the market wants the state to produce. But these high school students are starting to get to an age where they must begin to commodify themselves so that they can fetch a good price in the labor market. What this essentially means to me is starting to do things for the purpose of it looking good on a resume, doing generally good things that benefit you and others, but doing it only to make yourself worth more, such as volunteering because it makes you look like a good person to prospective employers. These kinds of things are the first step in the commodification of the self. And you know what, I think on a subconscious level, students know this too. They can feel their soul being sucked out of them by the curriculum's focus on the future job market or preparing them for higher education, instead of teaching them what they're interested in now or what they could be interested in now. Parents contribute to this kind of future-focused thinking also, and we see how it affects Meredith, the incredibly bright student who is nonetheless plagued by insecurity and self-doubt. Right from the beginning, it's made clear that her parents have harsh expectations of her. They want her to get into Princeton University, and it's suggested by her essay that that's all they care about. So the issue here is not that these expectations are unrealistic. Meredith seems pretty talented and smart. It's that her own aspirations and feelings are not being considered. The idea of getting into a good school has infiltrated its way into so many parents' minds as the only thing that matters. I'm sure you, watching, know a person or several people from your school years whose parents were super focused on their academic success, always breathing down their neck and would perhaps punish them for not meeting the expectations they set for them. Sure, I get the logic of wanting your children to get good grades and get into a good school, but it shouldn't take precedence over raising them to be socially conscious, empathetic, and mentally sound human beings. This is part of how the role of the parent is explored in Detachment. The other part, and the part that gets more emphasis, is the complete opposite of the parental dynamic I just talked about. What this film also wants to say is that when it actually comes down to it, many parents don't really care about what goes on at school. They view schools as places where their kids go to be babysat, and as long as they pass the tests with acceptable scores, whatever that might mean, they don't really care if anything is meaningfully learned. The film shows this by not showing any parents. There's only 2 occasions where a parent is heard from, and only one where they are actually physically shown on screen. That is this brutal scene near to the beginning involving an aggressive mother who abuses this poor teacher who is expelling her daughter.
Bitch, why are you here? You want to be at home with her every day? I don't have time for this bullshit. Do you understand me? Why are you here?
Notice that her main concern is with the fact that she now has to look after her own daughter. The other scene is focused on Meredith, and we kind of hear her father critiquing her appearance and personality, and we get more of an insight into why she is the way she is. But for the rest of the film, you don't see any parents, and neither do the teachers, who hold a parent-teacher night which no one attends. They talk in this scene about parents as if they are these elusive or extinct creatures. Obviously, most parents want what's best for their children. I'm not arguing against that. But what I'm saying, and what this film I think is also saying, is that parents are flawed. Many people are damaged from their own childhood and they pass that on to their own kids, as we see with Meredith's father, or they view their kids as perfect and set too high of expectations for them, and are disappointed when they're not met, as we also see with Meredith's father. Conversely, many parents are struggling and are too wrapped up in their own lives to give the attention to their children they need. In any case, we're all victims of the society and the flawed education system that puts too much emphasis on superficial economic-based life goals and not enough on individual humanity. I want to talk specifically about Henry's character. His life is mostly shrouded in mystery and it's difficult to ascertain much of his personality and background. However, the film explores his character mostly through these 2 young girls who ultimately require more of his attention than is allowed by the traditional emotional distance he applies to virtually every situation in his life. Meredith is the first of these characters, and I've already mentioned her. She's depressed, self-conscious, but talented, and she takes an instant liking to Henry for the kindness he shows her. As I said, Meredith's parents openly judge and critique her flaws and want her to be different. We don't get much more detail about this relationship, but it's an important one nonetheless. Erica's character is a more interesting one. I've seen this film 4 or 5 times, and I'm still wondering about how she fully fits into the story. At first I thought she existed solely to develop Henry's character, and she does do that, but upon recent reflection, I think there's actually a strong correlation between her and the primary message of this film. That is, the flawed ways in which we raise our children. Erica is a destitute child sex worker whom Henry meets and decides to help against his usual instincts, which would have been to ignore and distance himself from her. Instead, he provides her with shelter and food, and over the course of the film develops into kind of a father figure to her. Erica's situation is a perfectly realistic example of what can happen to a person when society fails them, when they lack the support structures to make it through adversity. This is the connection that I think exists between her character and the students at this failing school. Henry is everything that someone like Erica is missing: a parent, a teacher, and someone who cares for her. Erica also becomes the vessel through which Henry can redeem himself for what happens to Meredith later in the film. I think that ultimately Henry is someone who wants to help young people, and he does that by being a good teacher, but his damaging past prevents him from going any further than that. It prevents him from engaging personally with these vulnerable students, which is why he is a substitute teacher. This movie can be hard to get a solid grasp on, especially on first viewing, because there's just so much it wants to say, and so many interesting characters with which it wants to say it. Between the exploration of the main character Henry, and his relationship with his mother and father, and the underfunded state of this aged care facility, facility. There's the students in desperate need of help, the principal who is about to be fired for not meeting her Soviet 5-year plan production quotas, this fucking guy played by James Caan who takes drugs to deal with his miserable job, foot fetishist Bryan Cranston, Lucy Liu who hates her job, the lady who gets spat on and is potentially Henry's love interest for like 5 minutes until she thinks she catches him being a pedophile, and everything else that I've already discussed plus more. There's just so much going on in this movie and it's a fucking mess, but I love it for that reason. I love these apocalyptic scenes thrown in throughout of these empty hallways, and these teachers who have given up or are about to give up, and these bizarre monologues given by Henry in interview format. Like I said, I've seen this film multiple times, and I still don't fully understand how everything is interrelated, or if it even is. It might just be the fault of the film that its themes aren't explored to their fullest extent, but I don't know, it's certainly unique, and I really appreciate it for that reason. But the film doesn't really attempt to provide us with any solutions to the problems it presents. It just kind of says, hey, check out how fucked this is, and then it ends. So if I am to provide some type of conclusion, I'll say this. If you are in school, don't get too wrapped up in choosing your lifelong profession. Do your best to ignore societal and familial pressure around getting into a good career and making a bunch of money, because none of it matters if you're going to end up hating your life. Try to build an interest. Find something that you're good at or that you enjoy and see where it takes you. We have an epidemic of students graduating high school and not knowing what to do for the rest of their life and feeling as though that is a problem. Of course you don't know, you're not supposed to. And schools everywhere do a lousy job at fostering hobbies and passions. What they do instead is crush them. I'm reading Dune at the moment, and my favorite quote that actually comes from Kierkegaard and that I think fits perfectly here is this: "The mystery of life is not a problem to solve, but a reality to experience."